The Ash'ari position is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't actually speak by His will and His power. He doesn't speak or is not attributed with the attribute of kalam as a verb. He's not a God who actually speaks, which makes Him honestly akin to the idols of the pagan idolaters that they worshiped, a God who doesn't actually speak and is not capable of actually speaking. Today we have another interesting episode for you guys. In this video, from the title and the thumbnail, you can see I'm going to be asking and answering the question, is the Quran created? Is it makhluk? And according to who? And who is it not? That is the question. Now, many people would think, well, hold on a second, Jake. All Sunnis believe, as opposed to the Shia who believe that it's makhluk, who believe that it's created. All Sunnis, no matter whether they're Ash'ari or Maturidi or Athari, Salafi, they all agree that the Quran is not created, right? Well, I wish that were the case, but unfortunately, it's not. So let's have a quick example, and I've done this before, but let me share my screen and show you guys another most recent example, unfortunately, from Dr. Shadi al-Masri, where he discusses and describes this issue. So let's take a listen.
Is the Quran created? It is forbidden to say the Quran is created. The ulama, they divided the speech of Allah into two categories. His speech within Himself, and that is before all the creation, the speech of Allah was there. In other words, without language, without beginning, without end, without parts. Then things were created, like languages were created, people were created. And the Quran was then, as Allah says, we made it into the Arabic tongue. So the Quran was put into the form that can be recited. And that's the separation that they made there. Kalam nafsi and kalam lafzi. Kalam nafsi is infinite, has no beginning and no end. But the kalam lafzi definitely did come into existence because the language that it's in came into existence. That's how they reconcile the two. But it is forbidden to say the Quran is created. I'm allowed to say that.
So he gives the standard Ash'ari answer, but at the end he says, it is forbidden, it is haram to say that the Quran is created. But unfortunately, he basically just admitted that the Quran is created, and I'm going to explain why. So what is the standard Ash'ari position? The standard Ash'ari position, which he just explained, is that they divide kalam up into two parts. You have what's called kalam nafsi and kalam lafzi. Kalam nafsi is basically, as he said, it's supposed to be an eternal sifa. It's supposed to be an eternal attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they call speech. But when they explain it and describe what it is, that it's not made up of quote unquote parts, that it's not made of letters and sounds and words, right? When they go on to explain all the things that it's not and give information to describe what they think kalam nafsi actually is, it really can be reduced to either ilm, to knowledge, or will, right? It doesn't seem to really be a distinct sifa in the way that they explain. And this was the refutation of even the Mu'tazila, who refuted them and said, look, what you guys are affirming, we don't have a problem affirming that for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we don't believe that that's a distinct sifa other than, being reduced to knowledge or will. So that's what they believe is kalam nafsi. Now, kalam nafsi is not Arabic. It's not the Arabic Quran. So when a common Muslim thinks of the Quran, what do they think of? They think of the Quran which they hear, which is recited, which is in Arabic, which they read, which people can memorize and talk about. It's an Arabic Quran. When you use the word Quran to a common person on the street, common Muslim on the street, they have no idea about this concept of kalam nafsi. They're not thinking about this second or distinct Quran that is not in Arabic. So when a person asks, is the Quran created? We're talking generally speaking about the Arabic Quran. Nobody, unless you're familiar with this Ash'ari, honestly, nonsense, is thinking of an Arabic, a Quran which is eternal, which is not made up of letters and sounds and is some eternal distinct sifa or anything like that. No, nobody's thinking of that. And then he says kalam lafzi, which basically refers to the Arabic Quran, which is made up of letters and sounds and words and Arabic words, etc., etc. The Ash'ari position is that that is makhluk, that that is created. Why? And they say, well, Brother Jake, don't you believe that the Arabic language is created? Well, in a certain sense, of course, we would say that the Arabic language is created. However, there is no thing, according to Atharis and Ash'aris, who are both nominalists, who don't believe in extramental universals, generally speaking, We don't believe that there is this thing which is called the Arabic language. There are only examples or particular examples or instances of the Arabic language. Like right now I can say, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. So that I'm speaking the Arabic language, right? All praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Lord of the worlds. But there is no abstract thing which is called the Arabic language other than being in the mind as a mental conception. So when you ask, is the Arabic language created? Well, what are you referring to? You're talking about the mental concept. I mean, that I don't think you're talking about that. So when we start getting into details about what they even mean by the Arabic language, we see that their attempted question or response to us saying that the Arabic Quran is not created evaporates. So what is the Sunni position? What is the Athari position? What is the Salafi position when it comes to the Aqeedah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah? What is our position when it comes to the Quran? Our position when it comes to the Quran is that the Arabic Quran is not created. And I'll explain what that means in a second. However, it has a beginning in time. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by His will and His power, as an act of speech, He spoke it at a particular moment in time. He spoke it, it was revealed to Jibreel alayhi salam, and then Jibreel alayhi salam to the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. So we don't believe that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as if He was like eternally and constantly, without ever stopping, eternally and constantly was always just, speaking the Quran, the Arabic Quran. We don't believe that. And secondly, the Ash'aris don't believe that either, right? We believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can speak by His will and power at particular moments and instances in time. The Arabic Quran is one example of that. So when we say that the Arabic Quran is uncreated and the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we mean that He spoke it as an act by His will and power at a particular moment in time. The Ash'aris don't believe that. They don't believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually speaks. And then, Ash'aris are going to say, oh, no, Jake, see, you're jahil, you're ignorant, you're misrepresenting us, you don't understand our position. Of course we believe that Allah speaks. No, you don't, because in actual fact, the only thing you believe about kalam Allah, in terms of it being a sifa of Allah, or in terms of it being an attribute or aspect, or however you want to explain it, you only believe in this eternal sifa, which you call kalam Allah, which is not made up of letters and sounds and so on and so forth, and is not tied to His will and His power, right? It's not something that is tied to His will and His power. It's eternal, it's not tied to His will and His power. So you only believe in kalam with respect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a noun, meaning as a sifa or a thing. You don't believe it in terms of a verb or an action or an act of speech. So you don't believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually, by His will and His power and by His essence, actually speaks. You don't believe that. So you don't believe in a God that actually speaks. Now, if people are familiar with the Quran over and over and over again, and one of the refutations actually by Ibrahim alayhi salam and by the Quran of the false idols and other examples of this, is that why are you worshiping something which has no power, right? Which does not speak, right? And cannot hear. And so what does that mean? Is that not that anything that speaks, and see, the Ash'ari will respond, so wait, Jake, you're saying that anything that speaks is a God? No, astaghfirullah. But what it means is that a necessary requirement in order to be Allah, in order to be the true God, in order to be Rabbil Alameen, Lord of the worlds, you have to have the ability to speak. You have to be able to speak as a verb, not just as a noun, right? And so in the Ash'ari conception of this, all of these verses which refute the idols who are not able to speak is a refutation of the Ash'ari concept of God, because they don't believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually speaks by His will and His power. And the reason for that is because of their argument for what they think is an argument for the existence of God, right? Which is based on Huduth al-Ijsam. They basically, and I go into this, actually I have an article on this which I'm going to put in the description of the video. It all has to do with, they think that anything that has succession, right? So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes from not speaking to speaking, then he would have to be created. Astaghfirullah, which of course we don't believe that, right? And so because they have that position, they have to reject the position that he actually speaks by his will and his power. And in the result of that, they have to believe that the Arabic Quran is actually created. That's the standard Ash'ari position. Our position is Allah speaks by his will and his power. He spoke the Quran at a particular moment in time, and because it's an act of his speech, therefore it's not created, right? Because any of his attributes or any of his actions are not created. I have a whole article on Imam al-Bukhari where I go through that, where I demonstrate that that was not only Ibn Taymiyyah's position, as some people want to claim, but it was also the position of the early Salaf of Imam al-Bukhari and the early Muhaddithun. It was their position as well. And I demonstrate that very clearly. And I show that even Ash'ari authorities on this, who have commentaries on Imam al-Bukhari, admit that that was his position, the honest ones anyway. Now, where does that leave us? Well, Jake, the question then becomes, well, how do you explain that? Like Dr. Shadi supposedly assumed that anything that has a beginning in time is created. No, our position is no, that not anything that has a beginning in time is created. There's an exception to that supposed rule. Most things that have a beginning in time are created. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions, which include his acts of speech, if they have a beginning in time, his actions are not created. Because then the question would be, well, if he has an action that has a beginning in time, meaning he hasn't judged us yet on Judgment Day, he will eventually judge us, and that will be an action. Is his action of judging us on Judgment Day, which hasn't happened yet, is that created because it has a beginning in time? Well, the Ash'aris, and they have their own way of dealing with this, but anyway, it's complete nonsense. Now, we would ask, if you say that it is created, then we ask, who created it? If you say Allah created it, then we ask, well, who created that? And then you wind up in an infinite regress of explanations, or you wind up in an infinite regress without a stop of an explanation for who actually created that act, right? So to get out of this infinite regress, we say no, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions can have a beginning in time, and yet they're not created. Because if they're created by who? It doesn't even make sense to say that his actions would be created by somebody else. The Ash'aris, on the other hand, they don't believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala acts in reality. They don't believe that his actions are sifat that subsist within his essence. Anything that is described as his action is actually makhluk, is actually separate and distinct, and his actions refer to actual things in creation. Now, many people who are familiar with the Arabic language are saying, hold on a second, how could this possibly be that his actions are actually created? Because then who are they created by? Well, they say, the Ash'ari say, that his actions are actually identical to the effects. So you have, in this case, typically how it works in Arabic is you have the agent or the noun, right? The doer of the action. Then you have the action itself, and then you have the effect of that action. Well, then the Ash'ari paradigm completely contradicts that and goes against the Quran, which is based on that Arabic structure, because they believe that you have the doer of the action, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, supposedly. Then you have the effect of that action, and then what was supposed to be in the middle, the action, which is then is the effect as a result of, they don't have that three-tiered system. They have the agent, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the actor, the doer of the action on one side, and then they have the effect of the action on the other side, and they have no direct correlation or link between the two. They say that the action actually is the effect. And then no, some people are going to say, no, Brother Jake, but no, they actually believe there is a thing which is a relation between the act and the effect. Then I ask, is that act, which is supposedly a go-between between the agent, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the effect, is it real or is it not real? And the honest Ash'aris who actually know and have done the research, they'll say this is actually not real, right? This is ittibadi, which means it's something that is only in the mind. It's not this extramental thing. So in reality, to sum it up, guys, Ash'aris don't believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions subsist within him because of their ridiculous argument that they think they need or that is required in order to make an argument for the existence of God. We don't believe this. We believe that Allah's existence is fitri. We also believe that you can give rational arguments for the existence of God, but we don't believe in this argument because it contradicts the Quran and Sunnah. We believe that the arguments that are for the existence of God that are rational are consistent with the Quran and Sunnah, not based on some, Greek or paganly influenced so-called rational principles, which I would call pseudo-rational principles from the Greeks. We don't believe in that. We believe that the arguments for the existence of God that are rational are consistent with the Quran and Sunnah because we believe that reason and revelation could never possibly contradict one another. We don't neglect reason, but we say that it can never possibly contradict the Quran or the Sunnah. Okay, so to sum it up again, guys, the Ash'ari position is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't actually speak by his will and his power. He doesn't speak or is not attributed with the attribute of kalam as a verb. He's not a God who actually speaks, which makes him honestly akin to the idols of the pagan idolaters that they worshipped, a God who doesn't actually speak and is not capable of actually speaking. On the other hand, we Athari Salafis believe that Allah does and can speak by his will and his power, and the Quran and Sunnah are filled with numerous examples of speaking to Musa alayhi salam after not speaking to him and then stopping speaking to him, the revelation of the Quran at a particular moment in time, and so on and so forth. He can and does, subhanahu wa ta'ala, actually speak by his will and his power, and this is fully consistent with the Quran. And his actions, including his acts of speech, even if they have a beginning in time, are not actually makhluk, are not actually created, and that's in order to avoid one rational way of conceiving of it, although it's because Quran and Sunnah actually say it, but a rational way of conceiving it is because otherwise you'll have an infinite regress of explanations and you won't actually have a solution to that problem. Okay? And then the other thing, oh yeah, of course, about the Arabic language, again, we believe in particulars only, not these extramental universals. So the particular act of Allah speaking the Quran is uncreated. Now, when it comes to me, right, and when we talk about the Arabic Quran that we have, we say that it's uncreated and we say that it's the speech of Allah. Why? Because He subhanahu wa ta'ala actually spoke it. And I'll give it an analogy. Of course, it's not meant to be anything identical with the majesty of the Quran, right? Or the miraculous nature of the Quran. But it's an analogy for you guys to understand what we mean. If I give a speech, or I give a lecture, or I write a book, and then somebody else goes and takes a reference from my book, which are my words, are my speech, and they quote it in a lecture, and they say, yeah, Jake Brancatella said X, Y, and Z about whatever, there's some lecture about the logical problem of the Trinity or Christianity or something like that. They're going to attribute that speech to me. Why? Because it originates with me and from me. So that's my speech and those are my words, but they can quote my words. And then if I ask this question, is my original attribute of speech and are my words that I initially spoke when I wrote it or made that speech, do I say that it subsists, that it's somehow detached from me and then now subsists in that other person who quoted me? No, of course not. So in the same way, when we speak, when we quote the Quran and we recite the Quran and say, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, we say that these are the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is His speech because it originated from Him and with Him. And we say that it's uncreated because in the sense that He actually spoke it and it originated with Him and it's an act of His speech, right? And I am just simply quoting what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says or said in the past when I recite the Quran. So that's the analogy. We don't believe that His sifa of speech, whether it be an act or His eternal sifa of kalam, we don't believe that it's somehow detached from Him, astaghfirullah, and now is like subsisting in me in the manner in which, detractors of our position may think. So I hope that's clear for people in the same way that when I speak something and someone else repeats it, we don't say, oh, my act of speech somehow or my sifa of kalam detached from him and now is subsisting in that other person in a kufri manner, in the way that they imagine like the incarnation of Allah's subhanahu wa ta'ala's kalam, or the way that Christians may try to use these ridiculous arguments against our position. It's nothing of that nature, and I hope that this clarifies the issue for people. So I hope that this is a clarification. I used Dr. Shadi's video. He's not unique in this. He's just simply repeating the Ash'ari position in general. I hope this clarifies some things for people about what our position is, why we believe it to be the case from a rational and a scriptural perspective, and why the Ash'ari position is wrong for dividing kalam, making the Arabic Quran created, and honestly trying to play games with what the meaning of the word Quran is. They believe that kalam, this eternal sifa, is uncreated, but it's just a ma'na, it's just a meaning that without any words. We believe in the meaning and the words together, uncreated. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke it, and it's an actual act of speech of his. They don't believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually speaks. Okay, so that's one of the major differences. And then our position about the eternal sifa of kalam, we believe that it's eternal, which it means in this case that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always had the ability to speak whenever he willed by his will and his power. But when it comes to the Quran and speaking to Musa alayhi salam, those are acts of speech that he really spoke and came from him at a particular moment in time. So you have the eternal attribute of kalam, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ability to speak whenever he wills, and then you have individual or particular acts of speech that happen at particular moments of time, which are also uncreated because they are his and they are not created by someone or something else. Okay, and otherwise, if you took that position, then you would have to wind up in an infinite regress. With that being said, guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video and found it educational and is clarify some things to the people about the Ash'ari position versus the position that I'm representing here and attempting to represent, which is the Salafi Athari position of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments of this video. I'll put a couple links to other videos I made regarding this topic and some articles that I've written with respect to this topic. If you enjoyed this and would like to see more videos like it, then please consider subscribing to the channel. Like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends and family or your social media platforms, no matter how big or how small your reach is. And if you want to go above and beyond and to support the channel, then the best way to do so is at the GoFundMe link, which is pinned at the top of the description of this video, as well as my other videos, and also pinned at the top of the comment section of this video. With that being said, until next time, guys, inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.